Open Public Meetings Act has been met for this meeting of the Board of Education of the Borough of Oradell. Notice of this meeting was filed with the record of tabularies of all persons requesting such notice. Mrs. Walker, would you read the mission statement?
The Oradell Public School District is a safe and nurturing learning community dedicated to ongoing pursuit of educational excellence, inspires lifelong learning in its children through comprehensive, innovative curriculum and instruction. The district fully supports and expects the attainment of New Jersey core curriculum content standards on the part of all students within a school environment designed to maximize student potential, develop responsible citizens, and promote respect for the uniqueness of all individuals.
Thank you. Roll call. Mr. Griffin?
Here.
Mrs. Norio?
Here.
Mrs. Walker?
Here.
Mr. Walsh? Dr. Wesley? Mrs. Robertson?
Here.
Mrs. Nichols?
Here. Open to the public for agenda items only. I'm not seeing any. We'll move forward. We're going to go right into our presentations. Mr. Lee will be here around 8:15. So, Dr. Angel.
So we're going to begin with our presentation on park data. This will be the second piece, follow-up to our previous discussion where we talked about wanting to take a deeper dive into a look at how we performed as opposed to other districts in Bergen County. So, Ms. Bosios.
Do you remember that movie about the girl who jumped off in Atlantic City from the big pier into the water below? I feel like that's my deeper dive suddenly. So this is part 2 of our data presentation, and what part 1 did was it looked at Oradell Public School and how we scored in each of the 5 scoring groups on park at each different grade level. Remembering that park scores are given a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. 1 does not meet expectations, 2 is partially meets expectations, 3 is approaches expectations, 4 is meets expectations, and 5 is exceeds expectations. Today, all we are going to look at is the grouping of number 4 or 5, which is meeting expectations, so whether you're exceeding them or actually meeting them. And what we will do is we will look specifically at our performance compared to the state, compared to the Bergen County I, compared to general education students, and compared to special education students. We're all staring.
That's it.
There we go. So as I said, we're going to look at our performance of the Bergen County I, and just as a reminder, the Bergen County I is made up of 21 districts with similar socioeconomic makeup. When we look later, not just at districts, but at schools, what we'll be looking at is there are 38 schools in the Bergen County I that have a 3rd grade. There are 35 schools that have a 4th or 5th and 5th grade, and there are 23 schools that have a 6th grade. And the reason that number goes down is that often 6th grade is the beginning of middle school. So this is a different way than we've ever looked at the data before. And what we're looking at here is we're looking at state performance in math and language arts, Bergen County I performance in math and language arts, Oradell all students performance, Oradell general education students, and then we're going to look at those same 3 groups in special education, the state, the Bergen County I, and Oradell. So when we look at this, what we really want to hone in on is trends. So when we look at this right here, and we look at the blue, this is the 3rd grade language arts performance. So in the state, 52% of students in 3rd grade pass the language arts part test. 53% of students pass the math test. Then we move on to the Bergen County I, those 21 districts. 70% of the students passed in language arts, 71.5% of the students passed in math. Now we move on to Oradell, and this is all students. Now, 75% passed in language arts, 71.4% passed in math. We then move on and we pull out just our general education students, 76 and 75, and then we move on to our special education. We look at the state, we look at the Bergen County I, those 21 districts again, and then we look at Oradell. Looking at this data allows us to look for trends and anomalies. So for example, and this is going to be really important later on, one of the things you're going to notice is that in 3rd grade, and I point this out because this is going to be different in the upper grades, in 3rd grade, performance is stronger in mathematics at the state level and at the Bergen County I level. But when we get to Oradell, performance is higher in language arts. Now I point that out because that trend will be different in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. But it gives us something to talk to our teachers about and to look at our curriculum and our program resources. We then take that same data and we look at it for 4th grade. And again, we're looking at the state, the Bergen County I, and then Oradell, and the number of students that have passed. So we see if we look through language arts, 58% of students in 4th grade passed across the state. In the Bergen County I, 77% of students passed. In Oradell, all students, 82% of students passed. Of our general education students, 93% of students passed the 4th grade language arts PARCC assessment. And then we can look at that through a special education lens. And again, our job is to notice trends and anomalies. So what we notice here is that now, remember before I said in 3rd grade math was higher? What happens in 4th grade? Across the state, across the Bergen County I, Oradell all students, and Oradell general education students. Now language arts is higher. The only time we see a difference there is with Oradell Public School students with disabilities. That becomes our jumping off point. Why is this one group different from the trends that we see across the state, across the county, and within our own total students and general education students? That's what data is supposed to do for us. It's supposed to inform our questions and let us start to study what we can do better. We can look at that data now for 5th grade. And again, what are we noticing? 3rd grade, math is higher across the state and across the county. When we get to 4th grade, it's language arts again. That's still sometimes hard for us because what we know when the test was NJ Ask, that was different. Since it has become PARCC 5 years ago, performance in language arts consistently outranks performance in mathematics at the state, the county, and at Oradell Public Schools level. And again, I'm looking for what are the trends. So, language arts performance is higher, language arts performance is higher, language arts performance is higher, language arts performance is higher. In the Bergen County I, it's lower, but guess what? Our performance is aligned to everyone else. We can do the same thing for our 6th graders. When you start to look at this from a global perspective, one of the things you will begin to notice is that students, as they get older, the discrepancy between math and language arts is increasing. That's not an Oradell Public School difference, that's a difference across the state and across the county. So if we look here and we look at the difference between the blue and the red, now let's look at 6th grade. the difference is getting larger. And sometimes when we look at that data as a district without having some other benchmarks to compare it to, we get all nervous and we go, oh no, our sixth graders aren't getting it done. But the fact is, sixth graders across the state and across the county are struggling. And in relation to that, we're actually doing pretty well. We're now going to take a different view of the data. So this time we were looking at the percent passing compared to different groups. A very global group of the state, a smaller window of the Bergen County Eye, Oradell, and then just looking for trends between our general education and our special education population. Now we're going to switch gears for a minute. These tables we're going to look at from a school perspective and a district perspective. So we're going to begin by looking at it from a district perspective. I know you will remember that I said at the beginning there were 21 Bergen County I districts. So instead of starting with third grade on the top, because we always seem to do that, let's start on the bottom. And let's look at the class of 2018. This is the Oradell Public School class of 2018. They are currently 7th graders at Riverdale Middle School. When they were in 3rd grade, they scored better. By that I mean their passing percentage was better than one of the 21 districts in the Bergen County I. That means their percentile rank. They scored better than 5% of the districts in the Bergen County I. When they moved to 4th grade, they scored better than 6 districts. That ranked them 15 out of 21 and gave them a percentile rank of 30. As 5th graders, 2nd out of 21, that means they scored, their passing percentage rate was better than 95% of the districts. And then in 6th grade, their passing percentage rank was better than 38% of the districts. And just as a reminder, this is a language arts slide. So we are talking strictly about language arts performance. One of the reasons that I really started to look at different ways to present this data was because we get stuck on these percentages. But there's something really important to know about these percentages. The difference between 19 and 14 could be as small as 1 percentage point. Meaning that let's pretend that this group right here, this 19 out of 21, let's pretend they had 74% of our students passing. The district that scored 5 levels higher than them could have had 75.4%. That difference can be minuscule. And it's really important to remember that, and that's why I think it's important for us to look at this data from multiple perspectives. So that's one way to look at it, was through the district. When we first started doing this work, we actually always looked at it as a school as well. Oradell Public School and Oradell Public School District is stuck in this area of being a very large school and a very small district. So looking at it from different perspectives just lets us see if there's different things when we look at different ways. So it's the same exact data that was just presented, except this bottom group, where the denominator was always 21, now it's 38. So there are 38 schools we were ranking ourselves with. The reason it says 31.5 is because that means there was a tie. So if we look at this row here, our current 6th graders, when they were in 3rd grade, they scored better than 13 of the 38 schools in the Bergen County I. As 4th graders, their passing rate was greater than 6 of the schools in the Bergen County I. And as 5th grade, again, we see a different denominator. It's 35. Their rank was 14 or 35, which means that their passing percentage was greater than 60% of the schools in the Bergen County I. We're going to switch colors of our slides right now, which means we're switching the topic area, but before we do that, this graph is another way to look at the exact same data. Some people do better with tables, some people do better with graphs. So if I was to use this group over here, it was a very long time ago, this class of 2016, they are current freshmen at Oradell High School. Okay? These students over here, they are current 8th graders at Riverdale Middle School. This group over here are 7th graders at Riverdale Middle School. These are our 6th graders, our 5th graders, and our current 4th graders. Again, what we're looking at is their ranking in the county as a school. And now we'll switch from language arts to mathematics. I'm going to give you a moment to look at this data, but I think one of the pieces that we always want to look at when we look at this data is if I just gave you this year, this column right here, 17, 18 test scores, the one thing most people would be drawn to is the 19%. It looks lower. But now let's go back. What do we notice? This group continues to grow. That could tell us that our programs are getting better, our resources are getting better. It could tell us that this group has become better at test taking over time. But what it tells us is we can't just look here. And again, this is the district performance, the 21 districts in the Bergen County I, and then we move to the school performance. And then we look at that data again from the perspective as a graph. As the board knows, one of the things that Linkit does for us is they do not just provide us with benchmark test taking, they don't just store our data in a locker so that we have a clear portfolio look at every student at Oradell Public School. They also analyze some of our park data for us. And I'm very proud to say that Linkit is now changing some of their reports, I think because of some of the work we've been doing as a district to analyze data. The last time we were at a presentation, I think that was our idea. And what you're going to notice here is the growth in mathematics, and I'm going to go here for a minute, and then I'm going to go backwards. So this is our language arts data over a 4-year period. And it's looking at all students, not just a specific 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade. This is a really good way for us as a district to look at data because it takes the whole. And what I'm really proud of as principal and knowing the work that we've been doing as a district is if we look at our general education or our special education data, this white bar over here is 2014-15. So in our special education population, 42% were passing, scoring a 4 or 5 in 2014 or 15. In 2017 or 18, that's up 9 percentage points to 51. That's almost the exact same growth patterns we're seeing in our general education students. In 2014-15, 79% of our general education students passed PARC in grades 3, 4, 5, and 6 combined. Well, look at that, 89% passed 4 years later. What do we know as a district we've been doing? We've been focusing our professional development efforts on language arts, and that work is showing growth. And the reason I wanted to start there before going back to mathematics is what do we notice here? A plateau. What does this tell us? That the work we did in language arts, we now want to repeat in mathematics. We want to make sure our teachers have not just the resource, but also the professional development to increase their instruction. Because while these scores aren't really statistically different, they're not showing the growth. We've got a plateau going here where on that other slide, we have this trend of growth. And that's the same, and I think it's very important to say that it's the same for both our general education population and our special education population. As you'll remember, one of the district's goals last year was to work on assessment with our teachers and to make sure that assessment was driving instruction and informing our next steps. We have a responsibility as an administrative team and as Board of Education and as a district to ensure that our park data is doing that. This is not just summative data, it's informative data. It tells us where do we go next. So this tells you a little bit about what we've already done with this data. Yesterday at the faculty meeting, I gave this presentation to our staff because I wanted to encourage them to start to think about, look at some of the anomalies. What do you think? And I also wanted them to clearly hear the message that this isn't about pointing blame. This is about inquiry together. This is not about 1 year not having good test scores. This is about trends of data and us as a community. This is not data about one grade level. This is data about Oradell Public School District, and we all together make up Oradell Public School District. So we will continue to do what we've already done. At the beginning of this year, our 4th grade teachers looked not just at the park data from the year before, their students from the year before, they looked at the park data from the students that were now their students in 3rd grade. Lincoln has now created a way for them to do that very easily. It's called a fingertip file, the identified holes. What do I need to make sure that I do with this student that they didn't get the year before, so we know that we don't have a gap? We reached out to River Edge. We said, are you doing anything differently? One of the things that we learned, you will remember that when the test was New Jersey Ask, we offered an after-school testing academy. And when Park came, we didn't do it because we weren't quite sure what that testing academy would look like. It turns out River Edge is continuing to do it. And so we're now looking at our Title I funds to say how can we fund that, specifically targeting the students who are scoring a 3 that are approaching expectations. The students who are, as Linkit calls it, when we look at the Linkit report, the bubble students, who might need just a little bit of direct targeted instruction to move them from a 3 to a 4. And what we'll continue to do is we know that Lincoln is aligned to Park. It's one of the reasons we decided to adopt Lincoln. So when we give that next navigator report, we're going to make sure that we sit down and we look at that data and we say, who are the bubble students from this lens? And what do we need to do to help them? And again, it's all about professional development. We gave our teachers professional development in language arts, and they've shown a 10 percentage point increase in 4 years. What happens if we now can replicate that with mathematics, making sure we sustain the work that we're already doing in language arts? Data is not an end. Dr. Ansel began this by saying that we're going to dive deeper. Data is a jumping off point. It's where we decide where do we go next. So I'm guessing there might be some questions. Dr. Ansel has said he will answer questions today because I need water quick.
So any questions from the board first?
My question has to do with the after-school intervention, as you called it. I know you're looking at, you just said you're looking at bringing that back. Is there a start date potentially? Is it this semester or is it next year? Starting? Oh, March 2019. Okay, that's what I meant. It's this school year. Okay, sorry. All right, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question on page 9. I don't know if this is just a typo. I just want.
It's a typo.
It is?
That's 21% or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me where it is so before I post it. Fix it.
Yeah, it's the purple data, class of 2018, and doesn't match.
It should just be 39 to match the other one. It's just a typo.
So the 21 to 30.
Yeah. This is not just, slide before, that's all. Class of 2018 purple? No, it just should be 39.1 from the page before. before, that's all, just you're gonna put it up online, that's all. Question?
Another question I have, I don't know in the past, or if you guys have done this now, do you guys take a look at what our comparison is on the exceeds expectations versus the I groups, that percentage? I know we're looking at meets and exceeds, but I don't know if we've actually separated out what the exceeds.
I think the admin has, we don't do it in public, but this is, Ms. Rosales, you wanna speak to that?
Sure. We actually, if I was to rank them based on exceed expectations, our numbers would increase. We are actually meeting the needs of our high-end learners more than I sometimes think that we think we are. If I was to go back 4 years, we actually show a 22% increase in the number of students who are exceeding expectations. So we actually are increasing that, and our ranking on that would be slightly higher than our passing percentage. Remembering that that number 5 is part of passing percentage, so if I just pull them out, we're going to be a couple steps higher. So if we were 24 percentile rank, we might actually be 32 percentile rank. Actually, that's actually, if we have an area as a district to target, it's moving the 3s to the 4s.
Can you just tell me again, I know 5 is exceeds, 4 is meets, what's 1, 2, and 3 again?
Not yet, partially approaching.
Okay, what are they?
Not yet.
Okay,
Partially.
okay, meets and exceeds.
So, just to follow up on that, when you look at the data that was presented last month, along with this presentation, I think that one of the suggestions that I'd like to make is in regard to our goal for academic progress. We have been talking about moving students from level 4 to level 5. And based on what we've heard, my suggestion is that we should expand that goal. I don't want to say forget about moving kids from 4 to 5, but I'd like to add to that moving more of the kids from level 3 to level 4. So with your permission, now that we've had all these presentations, I'd like to now come up with the measures for our goals, but in doing so, I'd like to expand the academic goal.
I mean, I think it's good that it's up to the board. I mean, we can talk about it during Natalie's presentation also. Was that going to fit in with these at all, or no, just in strategic plans, not in the goals?
Yeah, that would be a little different.
Okay, so we can talk about that maybe after this, during old business. We can push that off for right now. Ms. Walker, do you have any questions?
No, just to Dr. Hanson's point, we did cover a little bit of that in discussion at curriculum this afternoon, because that was one of my concerns about moving from 4 to 5, but understandably with some of his explanation,
Right.
we want to maybe 3 to 4.
So let's talk about it when we get to your curriculum report. We'll talk about it then.
I have a question on, if I look on pages 10 and 11, with the class of 2018, I see a real increase in both on page 10, which is math, from a 20% increase from 4th grade to 5th grade, and likewise the same with page 11 with they're both math, but there's a big jump in for 5th grade. Is there a reason for that, and the test is different or harder?
You can't say the test is different because the fact is we're comparing it to everyone else in the county, correct? So the test is the same test for them as well. And as I said before, like if I knew the answers, guess what? I could be a consultant and make millions going across the county. All I can do is create theories and test those theories. So what do we know happens in 5th grade? One of the things that we do differently in 5th grade is we begin to departmentalize. Does that reap academic rewards? It's something that we then, as a district, can decide to test out and possibly try a departmentalization in 4th grade. I can't promise you that it will result in higher test scores. It's a theory, and just like any scientist, we study that theory. I actually did ask this teachers that exact question yesterday during the faculty meeting. I asked them to look at it and theorize about what could be creating that growth level. Could it be that it's just the third year, and as I've said to this board before, we do less part of test prep, and do they just get better at taking the test? It could be, or it could be the fact that we know that our schedule and our structure changes in 5th grade.
However, if I look at that, then going from 5th to 6th with that same group, they're back down to the 20. So departmentalized. Again, I like the idea of departmentalized, but maybe that's not our answer here.
We've changed our
True, true. And this is our 3rd year.
And again, I don't have the answers, but I could also remind the board that we reduced a section that year.
What did you just say?
We reduced a section. That 6th grade group right there, we're in 4 sections in 6th grade and 5 sections in 5th grade. Now, while the data says that class size doesn't matter, it might matter if a group of students was in a group one way, one year, and adjusting the next year. Again, it's a theory. I don't have the perfect answers, nor does anyone, because if people had the perfect answers, everyone would do it, and everyone would have these perfect scores. We create theories based on the data and test them.
Mr. Walsh?
Do you have the same data, first of all, which I would have had this before, I don't know if I would have come up with anything, but it's a whole different thing using graphs than using actual numbers and percentages. But do you have the numbers that the other districts have, what their numbers were? Did they have a not yet, a passing, and approaching? Like we had, is that the way it was part of the park?
Correct.
So you have the numbers for all these other districts?
And the numbers for every school in all of New Jersey and every subgroup in all of New
Not just
Jersey.
the district,
Got it all.
okay. Because I don't think we did that well. But I agree with Dr. Ansel that we should be doing better. And not only moving 4 to 5, but moving everyone else up. So that we have very few approaching. And I think that this year, 1920,